I'm joined by Sanisha Packirisamy. She's Chief Economist at Momentum. Thank you so much for joining us, Sanisha. So spurring economic growth was one of the key priorities that came out of the President's speech, with him talking about substantial infrastructure investment across a number of areas, also talking about capacitating the state to provide services more efficiently. Did it sound like more of the same to you, or were you excited as an economist by what he said?
Thank you so much for having me. I think, part and parcel of the State of the Nation address is that there are a lot of promises that are made from the socioeconomic front. And I wrote a report, just detailing some of the issues that came out of the SONA. And one of the sections I wrote there, is about expectations versus reality. And so while the plans that have been outlined by the president all look very good for growth, I think that we also need to look at it from a realistic standpoint, in that we are in the position where we've got quite a constrained fiscal position. And that means that many of the promises, according to the timelines that have been suggested by government, may be delayed because of the financial situation of the country. But by and large, I think we remain on track with further structural reform measures, maybe not to help growth so much in the short term, but these elements will be able to help growth in the medium term, sending South Africa's economic growth path a little bit higher on a 3 to 5 year time frame. And I think that kind of message is still very positive for investors and businesses.
Yeah, to the point that you make, Sanisha, about the fiscal constraints that we have as a country, I got a sense, listening to the president yesterday, that a lot of the programming that is yet to come really will depend on the private sector coming to the party. Do you think that, the prevailing environment, business confidence, etc., will be sufficient for us to get that buy-in and people putting their money where their mouths are to get economic growth going?
I think you bring up a very important point. So, a couple of years ago, we might not have seen, the private sector being called out in this kind of format, in a State of the Nation address, or even in a budget format. So by and large, we are starting to see far more acknowledgement from government and the public sector that they do need the expertise and the funding assistance from the private sector, and are coming out quite openly to say that they want to have more public-private partnerships in areas like energy, logistics, water, and the like. And I think that this is a very positive development for South Africa, not only in terms of economic growth, but in terms of how we can enhance job development coming out from this. And I think this, going forward, will then structure in a much higher level of economic growth, because the private sector will now be able to get on board, whereas previously there was quite a bit of government pushback in that regard.
So one of the things that the president touched on was the digitalization of government services, highlighting Home Affairs as key in point. There's a lot of work that's been done in that regard, talking about how that will create so much efficiency that it will be great for economic actors who have to deal with the government. What are your thoughts around that? And presumably that can't actually wait. There would need to be funding found for that in order for that to happen fairly soon, to help to facilitate the economic growth that we're looking for?
I think at the end of the day, it's again going to rely on the private sector funding and expertise to kick in and to assist government. We've seen that with the structural reforms under Operation Vulindlela, which is a project office that lies between the presidency and National Treasury, there was a crowding in of the private sector to assist in areas where network industries were broken and not facilitating growth the way they should. As an example, the energy sector, where we have now more private sector renewables coming on board, securing a higher level of energy supply. And I think very much in that line of thinking, Operation Vulindlela phase 2 also includes an element of digitizing the economy. And that means that we will probably see the private sector funding also coming on board in order to make this a reality going forward. As we said, on the fiscus side of things, we are very stretched. The purse strings are quite tight at the moment, and there are a large number of social demands coming through on the fiscus. And that means that ever more so now, we do need the assistance of the private sector to really kickstart the economic growth engine in South Africa.
What about the issue of knocking unemployment levels on the head? Was there anything that the president said that made you think, yeah, no, this could be a really good plan, or again, more of the same?
Unfortunately, even though government is doing their level best on trying to get employment up, I think ultimately what we need to do is grow the economic pie, and that will essentially grow the economic opportunities in terms of employment. What we've heard from the president in previous SONAs is that the public sector only hires a fifth of the workers in South Africa. So again, it's the private sector that needs to also be able to come on board to do so. I think where government can play a role is to ensure that we have an enabling environment for the business environment to kick in and to actually hire workers and build up that 4/5 of the employment base that can't be catered for by government. Earlier on you asked me, is this an environment that's conducive for business spend? I think if we look at the South African environment today relative to a year ago, one of the biggest improvements has been some political stability with the formation of the Government of National Unity. And we're seeing that coming through in a higher level of business confidence, much higher than where we were a year ago, still sort of below that neutral level, but quite a vast improvement. Businesses are also saying that political instability is becoming less and less of a constraint on fixed investment. We're in an environment where there is less load shedding. Yes, we did have a bout of load shedding in early February, but again, we are seeing higher levels of energy supply being secured overall if we look at the longer term trends. That means we have, a higher growth outlook for this year, quite a low inflation environment, more investor confidence and business confidence. So I'd say that we're sitting in a much better position at this point this year relative to where we were a year ago. And that, starts to put in place the building blocks. Of course, fixing something like the high elevated unemployment level and high levels of poverty and inequality in South Africa can't be fixed overnight. But I think where we can look to is where we're starting to put foundational blocks in place.
All right, Sanisha, thank you so much for your time there. That was Sanisha Packirisamy. She's the chief economist at Momentum.